And I picked up the phone and I called the chair and CEO of Applebee's. And I said, just wanted to say hi. And he said, I was expecting this call. And I said, as you know, this morning we announced that we have purchased for $2.3 billion the company, and we don't need two of us. So I'm going to have to let you go.
You're a stone cold killer.
So
that is the most insane, hardcore mother thing that I've ever heard. Like, welcome to another episode of the Matthews Mentality Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Matthews, and today we're joined by a legendary leader whose career has shaped some of the most iconic brands in the restaurant industry, Julia Stewart. Julia, it's good to see you.
Thank you.
Her journey to the top started humbly. At just 16 years old, she was waiting tables at the International House of Pancakes, IHOP. I love the International House of Pancakes. Over the next 4 decades, Julia rose through the ranks of major restaurant brands like Taco Bell, Applebee's, and IHOP's, ultimately serving 20 years as the chair and CEO of IHOP and later Dine Brands Global. Under her leadership, she spearheaded IHOP's $2.3 billion acquisition of Applebee's, creating the world's largest full-service restaurant company. Today, Julia is the founder and CEO of 𝐴𝑙𝑢𝑟𝑥. Did I say that correctly?
𝐴𝑙𝑢𝑟𝑥.
𝐴𝑙𝑢𝑟𝑥 Incorporated, a cutting-edge wellness company helping people live longer, healthier lives through science-backed tools and daily habit transformation. In 2020, she made a bold pivot from indulgent dining to proactive wellness, launching 𝐴𝑙𝑢𝑟𝑥, a premium wellness brand and app designed to help users build better habits in sleep, stress, and nutrition. I think I need help in all three of those. Today, we're diving into her remarkable career journey and how she made the leap from leading restaurant giants to launching a wellness brand. But before we get started, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with anyone who would benefit from today's conversation. Julia, welcome to the Matthews Mentality Podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming to my little town in Nashville.
It's lovely.
Yeah, it's great.
Complete with skyscrapers and the
it's
like.
amazing. We got skyscrapers. It's like a real city. No, I was, we had breakfast this morning and I was laughing. You were kind of telling a story as you were, coming up in your career, but really, you're the CEO of IHOP. And I think you said something that your kids, they were like, it's kids are amazing in the sense they're like, oh yeah, telling other kids or other people what their mom does. Like, she works at IHOP. And like most people probably like, oh, she probably makes a mean pancake, but it was a lot more than that.
Yes, but I think if you ask my kids, they said she makes pancakes.
Because you do make, I think
I do make a mean pancake,
yes,
but it was funny. I was like, that's what you think I do?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And then on weekends, she puts chocolate chips in them for us.
Oh yeah.
So
was that just on the weekends, or was the chocolate chip pancake an everyday thing?
Oh no, that was not an everyday thing.
Yeah, I was just,
thank you for thinking that, but no.
Yeah. That's why I was talking to my wife. She makes really good chocolate chip pancakes. And I feel like it's starting to bleed into the week. I was like, babe, we can't be giving the kids chocolate chip pancakes every day. It's got to be something like just a weekend specialty. So you had that on lock.
And my son, who's highly competitive, would bring his friends over on the weekends and they would try to see who could eat the most. And to this day, he believes his best friend, JD, cheated because he didn't put butter on it, and therefore he could eat 12 of them. So there's some concern about this.
Now, eating 12 chocolate chip pancakes, was there a rule like they had to hold it in their stomach for 30 minutes? Because I feel like I just throw that out.
There was never an issue. And if you saw JD, you'd even be more impressed. But to this day, he's a very successful lawyer in Chicago. But to this day, they still talk about the fact that JD holds the record.
Well, let's talk about to this day, 𝐴𝑙𝑢𝑟𝑥. Walk me through. What does day in the life look like? Where are you spending your time?
Well, so it's really all about funding right now to get literally financial support to take it from what is a minimal viable product live on the Apple Store and get it to where we can produce it on the iPhone, the Android, your computer, and it's all generated by AI. So I am in the midst of fundraising to take it from
Ooh, that's got to be fun.
Proof of concept, which we've done, now take it all the way to generating not only millions of pieces of content, but really helping millions of people. So we're in the midst of fundraising.
And I don't know if it's something you disclose, but how much capital are you looking to raise?
No, it's $3 million. It's fine. It's not a lot of money, relatively speaking. But I have been doing a lot of bootstrapping. It's time to get others involved.
Sure.
And so that's where we've taken it to this point.
And so talk to the audience about raising capital and what your experience is. Is it just traveling, coast to coast, meeting with family office? Are you meeting with institutional equity? Like walk us through, what is capital raising?
It's very different in the startup world than what I did in my prior life. So raising $2.3 billion took about 2 phone calls in my prior life. This is very different, and it's meeting with family offices, VC offices, private equity offices, high net wealth individuals. It's the gamut, but it's a very different world. And it's also, if you don't have somebody who either likes or understands health tech, you're probably not going to get very far. If you don't really think in your heart of hearts that you want to help people with their health, you're probably, I can tell pretty quickly if you don't have an interest. So they want to meet me, they want to understand it, but within a very short period of time, it becomes either there's a lot of interest because it's health tech and you're making a difference. You asked me the other day, what's been the biggest, not disappointment, but what's been the biggest surprise in raising money? And I would tell you the stereotypes. I'm shocked that in this day and age, there's still stereotypes. They have this vision that a health tech professional is somebody who's 23 and working out of their garage. And I am neither of those things. So it's kind of been interesting about they make this perception.
Like a caricature, like
I'm
you have to be the guy who wears t-shirts and
I'm a little
80,
surprised by
80
that.
bands on their arm,
Yeah,
right?
that is surprising that I'm a trained professional. I've been an executive. I've certainly dealt with just about anything and everything. And yet here we are arguing about whether or not somebody like me could be scrappy. I just find the perceptions or the misperceptions kind of interesting.
I wouldn't even think about that. Maybe you bring in a partner, you give them 0.1% of the capital stack, and it's some like 24-year-old who wears Fitbits and lots of things, you know, like wears white sneakers everywhere and always is tan. I don't know.
Let's see if he or she calls after today. Yeah.
That's funny. So you're going from a career in the restaurant space, which we're going to cover today. Okay, the Taco Bells, the Carl's Jr.'s, the obviously IHOP, Applebee's, Dine, and now you're in the health and wellness, the fitness. Was that part of the driver, the impetus, like where you spent a majority of your career in a space that isn't necessarily known for fitness, and you're like, look, I want to do the total opposite?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is really the case. This everyday indulgence, I didn't specifically get up one day when I graduated from college and say, I want to be an everyday indulgence. But by the time I got to the brand, it really was everyday indulgence. And so you, as a marketer, which is how I started out, trying to change that is really, really hard because people are attracted to the brand for its everyday indulgence. So, for instance, when I got to Taco Bell and we created Border Lights, very unsuccessful. People didn't want to get healthy eating at Taco Bell, or they didn't want to eat for less than 500 calories at IHOP, or they didn't want Weight Watchers at Apple. When you think about all the things we did, there was not a lot of success for that because people already saw the everyday indulgence. And for me, somebody growing up being taught you work out every day, you eat right, you sleep right, I was shocked at what I saw, and I thought someday I could actually do something different. That's how I ended up in health tech.
Interesting. And what have been what have been the commonalities, similarities in the industries, and what has been totally different outside of the stereotype of like the fitness CEO? But where is your experience translate, and what skills have you been like, wow, this is a totally new skill for me?
So if you think about my career, it's all been consumer-facing businesses. This is no different. It's the same thing. I'm responsible in creating user experience every day. That is no different than being in the restaurant business and creating a user experience every day. The difference is at Dine, it was 250,000 employees every day getting up and serving 2 million people a day. Here, it's doing it all through an app and communicating and getting interactive with thousands and thousands of consumers, but doing it in a very different way, but still basic principle is consumer facing. So that is very much the same. In the restaurant business, we used to always complain, oh my gosh, you only have an hour to get to somebody. And here in the app world, you have about 30 seconds.
Yeah, I was going to say seconds, right?
It's really very different and yet very much the same. So I would say that's almost identical, just done differently. I think what's different is, dare say, in the app business, you really are changing people's lives. And I've had many a person send me an email saying, thank you for changing my life. I now get up every morning and I practice gratitude. I do box breathing. I'm making a huge, I'm better to my family. The things we're able to do with the app is very different. Yes, we made a lot of people happy. Yes, a lot of people had a livelihood. So it was all wonderful, but this is a very different
It's
scenario.
a different one. Because I was thinking as you were talking, like, you probably didn't get a lot of that, as the CEO of IHOP. But then I was like, well, no, that's not true. I mean, certainly careers and livelihoods as a professional,
Absolutely.
but not maybe the health and like the personal transformation
No,
as much.
You will get the couple that's been married for 40 years that goes to its 40th anniversary at an IHOP, and it's a heartbreaking letter of gratitude and thanks. And we've always been here, or saving someone's life. The number of food servers who would practice saving someone's life. They would have a heart attack. Those are great stories, but this is a day to day. With the app, it's daily.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, IHOP, you changed my wife's life. When we met in college. I was at USC. I played football. She was a cheerleader, but like, that's not how we met. I just was walking by a Starbucks, like, oh, it's, good looking lady. So I went and talked to her, which wasn't really something I was ever known to do, but, hey, it's fate, right?
It worked out.
Somebody spoke to me and said, you got to go talk to this person. But anyway, so I come from a huge football. Everyone in my family played football. And I was playing football at USC. She was the exact opposite. You couldn't be further. Like, only child from New York, academic, like she had never been to a football game until she made it's not even a cheerleading team at USC. It's a dance team, the Song Girls. And so we started dating. It was like a third, fourth date. It was like Saturday morning. We went to IHOP and she goes, hey, can you explain football to me? And so I got 22 coffee creamers. I got the blue, like French vanilla coffee creamer. That was the defense.
And we only put 6 in a cup. So
I had to go around and get them. So I got like 21, I got 11, blue coffee creamers. That was the defense. And then I got the white normal coffee creamers. That was the offense. And I sat there for like 2 hours and explained football using coffee creamers at an IHOP.
I love it.
Didn't know that, did you, Zach? Yeah. And so to this day, IHOP, well, you're no longer CEO. You're not going to take offense. We don't eat there very often, but it's a very special thing for my wife. See, hey, sweetheart, you remember that? Like,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So
what a great story.
It's a great story. And then unfortunately, she's had to deal with the football dynamic of our family the rest of her life. She's like, I wish you never explained that stupid sport to me. No.
That's great.
But I thought it was so cool. Your resume. Now, there were a lot of stops in between. I'll do my best to cover it. You started as a waitress at IHOP when you were 16, and fast forward, you're the CEO. When your first day on the job, were you just like that killer's like, I'm going to be the boss of this one day? Or were it was just, I need a job?
No, it was, wanted the job. But remember, and maybe you don't, but back then, and they were called waitresses. Today it's a food server. But back then.
Oh my, has that changed?
Oh yeah. You should refer to them as a food server.
Well, I know they changed the name from stewardess to flight attendant. So I got that down. I didn't know
food server.
Food server.
And I wore the hat and the apron.
We had the whole outfit.
The cuffs.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. With the shoes. I mean, people think I'm not telling the truth when I say I can't find a picture of me. There is somewhere.
I was going to say, can we get a picture of
this?
But
what I did was, for 1 year for the convention, we had obviously every year we would have a franchise convention. I walked out on stage with the uniform on and the place went crazy.
Oh, from back in the day?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so
complete
cool.
with, and some of it I had to find online. The cuffs.
Yeah.
That were white that had you put the cuff over and we would complain every day because back then the entire pass bar where we would get the food was all copper. And so by the end of the day, your white cuff, so you have to go home and bleach them, and we would complain. And the guy would be like, the manager would be like, well, I'm sorry, that's what it is.
Well, you had the coolest idea, and we'll explore how you got it, about serving veterans on Veterans Day. And it was one of the, if not the biggest decision you ever made. And it was so amazing on so many different levels. But you think it's possible to do like a 1 day a year, bring back the IHOP uniform day? Or is the culture moved so far beyond there, like, I'm not wearing this thing?
Actually, I think it could be really cool.
Right?
I think I was shocked at the number of people who sell the IHOP memorabilia. And now I'm going to relate to you. There was a promotion that was done long before I ever was involved of football helmets. You can collect all the NFL. I mean, it is, if you really go online, you have to look, but you cannot believe what you can
Yeah.
find online. And that's how I found my cufflinks. It's amazing. And
Yeah.
it's still very much a genre because it's part of the American
It's
culture.
nostalgia.
It is
yeah.
the American icon.
To a time, whether it's real or imagined, and there
Sure.
has simpler time or better times, and whether it was actually that or it's in their head, yeah, there's a
The blue
nostalgia
roof.
to it.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I meant, it's
And
so
I
cool.
still get emails sent to my 𝐴𝑙𝑢𝑟𝑥 email address. I got one last week of a guy saying, it's just not the same since you left. And I'm like, sir, and lives in Maine. And he couldn't have been nicer. And I said, well, sir, I'm so sorry that your experience wasn't what I remember it to be. But, here's a 7-day free trial for 𝐴𝑙𝑢𝑟𝑥 and be well.
There you go.
But anyway, yes, I still
You
get that.
did what you need to do. So started as a waitress, IHOP at 16, but I actually do want to kind of dive deeper. What was your mindset when you got your first job or first job at IHOP? Like, were you just naturally, did you already know that, hey, I'm going to be the boss one day, or I mean,
No,
how are you?
I
How are you?
think,
I'm looking at the
yeah.
nature question. Like, were you just wired to take over, or?
So two things.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever at that point thought I'm going to be CEO of a major company. I think it was early on. Think I told you, I was an only child to 2 high school teachers who didn't talk to me about business, but they did talk to me about learning and growing and mentoring and coaching. So that part I got, and I do believe that affected my leadership style. But in terms of business, no, I think it was in my wood. My dad used to tell the story. He came home from school I was in the 3rd grade, and I had organized the entire neighborhood. And he asked me why, and I said, well, it just needed to be done. We were hooligans, not doing anything substantial. And here I could bring us all together, and we could put a lemonade stand together, and we could help the less fortunate. And we could I actually remember doing we raised money and did an entire talent show in the garage and, all kinds of things. And it was just a small little neighborhood. We were all going to come together. It was all kids. And I remember telling my dad, I really enjoyed doing it. It was like a privilege.
It's just in your DNA.
I think it was in my DNA. But I think the notion of learning and growing and experiencing and mentoring and coaching, that came from watching my parents. But they wouldn't say it. It wasn't like, right? My dad would.
Modeled behavior.
Yeah, well, Dad would always say, there's only one profession, Julia. That's teaching. That's noble. You're making a difference in people's lives. You have to teach. And I have a story about him being very disappointed when I graduated from college and didn't go into teaching as he knew it.
Well, let's talk about that. You went to school, San Diego State, right? The Aztecs.
I went to San Diego State.
And before we're going to jump into your career ladder, because again, it was just upward mobility, right? He was disappointed. Like, walk us through. Like, was it you go home, you say, "Hey, Dad, I have to tell you something."
Graduation day.
Yeah.
Very excited for me. What are you looking at?
Did your parents go to college?
Yeah.
Okay.
They had to become teachers.
Yeah, good point.
But it was funny on both sides of the family. Only 2 people who ever went to college. I'm the only offspring of that ever. I mean, it's really kind of an interesting story. But I remember saying to him, Pop, I'm so proud, and I can't wait to go out there and in the real world and get the job. And he was like, what are you thinking?
What do you mean?
And I said, well, I'm going to go into marketing. And he said, no, you're going to go into teaching. I'm like, I'm going to try my hand at marketing.
What was your degree in?
It was communications with a minor in business and marketing.
Okay.
And I really wanted to, go out into the world. And I ended up getting the job at Carl's Jr. And my dad called me up and said, you what? Carl's Jr., you're going to go in the restaurant business. You have a college degree. And I'm like, no, Dad, I'm actually going to work in marketing. And so this went off and on for multiple years. When I left Carl's Jr. and I ended up at Burger King, he was still very disappointed, although that was quite the career, which I can come back and tell you. But
That's
when
just because he liked the Superstar better than the Whopper. I mean, the Superstar or the Double Western Bacon Cheeseburger is like, Carl's Jr. is good.
A man after my own.
Oh,
Anyway,
yeah.
yes. So when I finally got to Taco Bell, and by now my career has taken off, I'm no longer in marketing. I've gone into operations. He says, I still got to be honest with you. It just breaks my heart that you didn't go into teaching. And I tell the story. I said to my dad, I want you to meet me at such and such a restaurant at Taco Bell. So he drove up to LA and I said, I'm going to show you what it's like to be an executive at Taco Bell in operations. I just want you to watch. And then at the end of the day, we'll go somewhere for dinner. So we went to 6 Taco Bells, all in South Central LA, which was part of my territory. Not easy, not an easy environment. And at the end of the day, I took him out for drinks. We couldn't find a restaurant, so we went out for a drink. And I'll never forget my dad, tears coming down his eyes, saying, you do teach. You do it every day. You just don't do it in a classroom. And I'm like, that's right, Pop. I do it every day. I'm here to mentor and coach. And what do these kids want to do? They want to go somewhere. They want to make something of themselves. That's what this is all about.
That had to be very meaningful, right?
Oh my gosh, it was life-changing. And obviously he passed, but I remember him saying, I am proud of you. You do teach. You just don't do it in a classroom.
So cool.
Yeah.
I probably went to some of those Taco Bells in South Central when I went to school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there was one right near USC. So.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
I went to it too many times, unfortunately, start packing on some weight, but luckily I was burning a lot of calories. What years were you at Taco Bell?
I got there in 1991 and I started as an advanced management recruit where I was going into operations, but I started as assistant restaurant general manager and I worked my way up. There are pictures somewhere of me. And then when I left, I was running all of franchise operations.
So your background, is kind of marketing, right? You said,
Sure.
I'm going to go into marketing,
Sure.
but it sounds like you were very much on the operations side.
So when I started out in marketing, by the time I really started getting into different restaurant companies, I knew I wanted to run something. I wasn't sure where, I wasn't sure how. And look, this is not like a recipe I just thought in my day and age and what I was going through, no one was going to make somebody that had a marketing the CEO. And I made that decision. So at some point I decided if I don't have P&L experience, no one's going to make me the CEO. So I really want to leave my career in marketing and I want to go into operations. And I actually went to the then CEO of the company I was working for as vice president of marketing and said, listen, I'll go anywhere. I'll do anything, but I need to go in operations. And he said, no, you make too much money for us in marketing. You can't leave. And I'm like, no, I'll go anywhere in the country. You send me anywhere. I just want that operating experience. And he said, no.
Was this at Taco Bell?
No, this was at Black Angus.
Okay.
And Stuart Anderson's Black Angus Cattle Company restaurants, which was then based in California. And he said, no, I can't let you go. And so years later, I ran into him at an airport and he apologized and said, maybe I may have been remiss. Yeah. But at any rate,
it's the ultimate compliment, right?
I guess. So
you can't leave me. But then you actually left?
So
right?
Actually, I don't think I told you the story. It's a great story. So I'm getting an award on behalf of Stuart Anderson's for great advertising. And it's a cowboy treading sideways through the Western Front, watching crab legs. It's a great, great commercial, 30 seconds. And it won an award. So I go to Chicago to accept the award. And I'm there and I'm kind of frustrated because I can't find anybody who wants to take me in operations. And I'm thinking, I've got to find this. I mean, this is my, because I work my plan and that my plan was I have to go into operations. So I'm at this awards banquet and I walked in and this lovely, actually reminds me of somebody who works here at your podcast. And I walked in and she said, well, welcome and whatever. And we're going to do a little informal get together and then we'll go to dinner. And then I said, thank you so much. And she said, by the way, we've got some really, famous people here. And I'm like, oh, famous, like who? And she said, well, John Martin is here. He's the CEO of Taco Bell. And that's what got me thinking. I couldn't get anybody to be interested in me, but I had read about the fact that Taco Bell was doing what they called back then an AMR program, Advanced Management Recruit, which meant you would come from another industry, you would get the job in operations, and you would work your way up or out, right? So anyway, I said to her, so where's dinner? And she said, well, dinner's in this other room and it's assigned seating. And I said, can you show me? So she takes me in there and I said, listen, I just need 30 seconds if you can guard the door. And she's like, sure. So
You didn't move the name
I did.
tags.
I found his name
Good
tag
for you.
and I switched name tags and I sat next to him and poor man, never knew what hit him. And I spent 2
Did
hours.
you tell him years later?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And I spent 2
Good
hours
for you.
throughout dinner explaining why I was the perfect person. And the next thing I know, I got a call from the executive recruiter. And the next thing you know, I went to work for Taco Bell. And honestly, he was an amazing, unfortunately, he died too young, but he was an amazing human being who had this incredible vision for Taco Bell. And I went ahead and started the advanced management recruit program, actually in San Francisco. And then the rumor was they were moving me to Detroit. So I'm like, okay, never spent any time in Detroit. This is going to be fun. And at the 9th hour, the gentleman that was in San Francisco left and I ended up replacing him. And the rest goes on.
The rest is history.
Yeah. So I ended up working my way up. And I remember going to John, maybe had to be a couple of years in, and saying, John, I've got this great idea. I want to start 24/7 at Taco Bell. And he's like, well, you can't ruin the company. You only run the West Coast, so go for it. And I'm like, really? That's okay. And so the rest, I kept coming up, because part of my world from marketing was innovation. How do you get more consumers to come in more often? And so I brought that sort of mindset into operations. But if you really think about it, all those people who kept saying, no, you couldn't be successful, I ran an entire marketing department. How do you think I was going to run operations without those same basic principles? So I always thought that was a little odd that people thought you couldn't possibly be successful in operations if you'd already been successful. And anyway, rest is
It's so interesting. The 24/7. So that was that you
we
came
started it on the West Coast.
So how do you, just without taking too much of the time we have today, like walk me through, was there just a moment that you're sitting at your dining table, you're driving, like when does the idea come in? Like, is it like a flash, like a lightning bolt moment? And then like, give me the actual kind of brass tacks. Is it, you just look at, okay, let's run a model. If we open for an additional 8 hours, here are the incremental costs, but this is, I guess, based on assumptions, here's the revenue we're going to bring in.
So for me, it was because I spent so much time with the franchisees, they kept telling me, I'm running this restaurant and I'm paying the lease, right? I'm paying gas and electric. I'm paying for and I shut this thing down at midnight and then I open it back up at 6. And here's what I have to do during that. There was a lot of just general frustration that I had. The model was such that they had all these things they had to do. And I remember at the time, he didn't work for me, but he was part of the team. That's another thing. Get all the people on the team to go with you, even though that was a learning. PepsiCo owned Taco Bell at the time. And that was probably one of the greatest learnings is all those people who worked for me didn't really work for me. They were just on the team. And I sat the team down and said, I've got this interesting idea, but I can't figure out how to make it work. And Eric, who I still am friends with to this day, who was quote unquote my CFO, said, well, how difficult can that be? We'll just model the numbers.
Model it out.
And we'll let's get the real estate guys involved and let's figure out what things you need to be successful in those hours. And we know that 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, there's probably nothing, but from 12 to 2, what they call the shoulder, right? And 5 to 7, the other shoulder, we probably can make this work. And so we put a model together. Back in those days, he made 250 DVDs and we took it out to the franchise community and we had a whole presentation. We told them what we would do and it worked.
And it was a hit.
That's 20% increase.
Please tell me you were the brains behind the double-decker taco.
I'm not.
Oh, because I remember the commercial, Shaq and Hakeem, crunchy, soft, crunchy, soft.
No.
And I'm really disappointed they got rid of that. Not that I'm a little more disciplined in my advanced age, but I really love that double-decker taco.
But we did it. It became successful, and then it rolled out across. It took a long time to roll out across the country, and there are probably still. I probably think there's probably 10% of America's Taco Bells that maybe aren't 24/7, but the large majority are.
That's
And
awesome.
it makes money.
Great story. There you go. No, it really is.
But I remember going to John saying, I've got this great idea, who was then the CEO, and he's like, I don't think you can screw up the company doing this. Go for it.
I love it.
And the rest is
He probably had like a deeper consideration, but even just how he framed it, I don't think you can screw it up. That's really cool.
And he was really a visionary about trying new things and innovation, which when you think about probably any business, yours, mine, anything, it is about, to some degree, innovation, which everyone was big on back then, just trying to get the new creative idea. And today, people look at me and say 24/7. I mean, that's not really, but back then, big doings.
Absolutely. I wanted to kind of take a step back. I had asked you earlier when you start as a waitress at IHOP, you're like, I'm going to be the CEO. And it was, I'm paraphrasing. You're like, nah, not necessarily. But you said something in describing being at Black Angus to Taco Bell and saying, I can't be the CEO if I'm in marketing. And it's not, that I have a plan. So somewhere between, 16-year-old waitress and I don't know what your age or where you're at in life, you did make a plan. And was that a formal career life plan that you wrote out, or was it just kind of an abstract plan in your head?
I started writing plans. They're on a easel in my office still to this day. And they usually were
like an art easel?
Small easel on my desk.
Okay.
And a framed easel. And I would say I started doing them before I graduated from college. So let's say late teens, early 20s. I did one for my 20s. I did one. I just kept doing them. And they would change, and I saved them. So if you looked at my early ones, it was all about, I got to make some money.
Well, yeah.
I got to have some kind of fun.
Your why, your motivation.
And then it began to change. And if you looked at it today, it's very different than it was.
How so?
But still a plan. I think there's much more about my philanthropic endeavors and giving back, which in my 20s I would have loved to, but there wasn't much I could do.
Would it be okay if I frame it as legacy? Much now it's more legacy.
Well, I don't create the legacy. You tell me what my legacy is, right? Everyone else will tell me what kind of legacy. But I guess for me, it was, I want to work that plan, and it's a vision, it's a goal, it's very important to me. And then when I got into senior leadership and even being CEO, you got to take people with you. So if you're not crystal clear about that vision, I would start every executive team meeting with, ladies and gentlemen, let's not forget the vision. So it became part of my personal life and my professional life about create that plan, work that plan. And when things didn't go my way, which would happen, then my job, like you said earlier, was to go sideways around, whatever it took to
move the name tags.
Move the name tag, which might be the name of the book.
Move the name tags.
Move the name
That's
tag.
a great name. Can I?
It is the truth.
Yeah. Do I get to write the foreword if I come? No, I'm just joking.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have this plan. Every 10 years, you're updating on an easel, plus or minus. There's probably so much to dive deeper into, kind of climbing that career ladder. Can you generalize from going to Taco Bell and getting your first shot at operations to becoming the CEO of a company? What was that time period? Is it 10 years, 15 years?
So the marketing part of my career was the first 14.
Okay.
And like I said, that last year, I really had decided I can't write another strat plan. I can't do another advertising commercial. I really, really wanted to go in ops. So the marketing part of it was 14 years. And it was a great time. But even in those 14 years, I kept moving because, and now mind you.
You mean literally moving?
Moving somewhere else, moving to another company. But back then, people were very direct about, I'll never forget going to Burger King saying, I'm ready for my next assignment. And the guy's like, you're the highest ranking female at Burger King. You're done. So it was
That's
like,
wild.
okay, well, then I'm going to have to leave because, so back then people were pretty honest about, you're going about as far as you're going to go.
Specifically because you're a woman.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And they were pretty honest about it. So I think part of it is today they call it experience capital. Back then I didn't know any better. I just said, I have to keep moving. I was single. I could move anywhere. And I kept moving because I wanted more responsibility, more accountability, and I wanted to learn more about the business of marketing. So by the time I finished my 14-year stint in marketing, I did media, I did marketing, I did PR, I did strategy. I had done it all, commercials, advertising. Back then, that's what we did, largely TV. Markets, new markets, introducing. I mean, I had done it.
You've done it all.
U.S., outside the U.S., I had done it all.
How many times had you moved companies? And how many times did you move geographies? First in the marketing kind of segment of your career, and then in the operations leading up to being the CEO?
10 times in marketing, 14 years.
Moved 10
Either a
companies,
company or a
a
city.
location.
Yeah,
Wow.
I'd
And what about
lived
on the operations side?
operations. I only moved twice and then went into general managementship and CEO.
What are your
Well, no, 3.
what are your thoughts on the statement? This is my statement, but like, hey, I want to be the CEO of the company, but I don't want the inconvenience of having my life disrupted. I don't want to move. I like where I live. I don't want to have to switch companies. Is clearly
Well,
you did.
I think those are choices. I think it's slightly different today, maybe not too much different. I think I can't tell you the number of people who said, I want your job. And I'm like, great, let's talk about the sacrifices. Let's talk about what you're going to do. And oh, by the way, let's sit down in your performance appraisal and talk about the things you don't know how to do yet. Let's talk about what experiences you need to be. And people would be like, well, I'm not going to leave my job and go do something else. So part of it is about, it was sacrifice. And in a very positive way for me, it was sacrifice. And I'm not suggesting everybody should do what I did. I did everything backwards. I got married late. I had children late. Most people don't do what I did, but for me, it worked for me and it was necessary.
So that's an amazing segue for me as the host. Necessary is a great word. I don't think I've heard someone use that on the show yet, but I wrote down sacrifice, which we talk about all the time. And then what I love, I think I told you at breakfast this morning, like the why. And you mentioned earlier, like in your 20s, like I got to make money, right? But
yes, because I had none.
Because you had none. But if I may, let's fast forward 20 years. You're in operations, whatever your title is, senior vice president.
Sure.
And because again, I'm going to spend some serious time on the female dynamic of someone saying, "Hey, this is as high as you go."
Right.
That's a insane thing to say, but it's also probably so much of what, especially women in the workplace, want to reach out to you and say, "How do I do it?"
And remember, I told you at breakfast, it's still alive and well today. It's just subtle.
It's more subtle.
It's just not as obvious
and
today.
so, but I think what I'm saying is you probably financially were, more is always better, right?
Right.
But you were doing okay. Why did you need to become the CEO? Why didn't you put the female thing aside, if I may? Why didn't you say, you know what? I have a nice job. I like where I'm at. I'm making good money. I don't know if your husband was making good, but like you just use the word necessary. That's a big word. Like, why was it necessary?
Let me break that down.
Yeah, I know it's a big question. A lot to unpack there.
It's a lot to unpack. So early on, absolutely, I didn't have a dime. So it was really about
financial anxiety, right?
trying to get some financial whatever. Yes. So early on, that was absolutely the case. And then I think it became, I knew I wanted to learn and grow. And once that stopped happening at a company, and grow to me means more responsibility, more accountability, learning different things, challenging myself, I began to take the role nobody wanted. So by the time Burger King's a great example. We would get in the room and somebody would say, somebody's got to go to Boston. I'm like, I'll go. You're going to go to Boston? Yeah. Well, the guy robbed the advertising fund and you're going to have to recreate that whole thing and you're going to have to start all over and you're going to have to convince those franchise. I'll go. So part of it was risk taking. I look at it as calculated risk taking. People are like, oh my gosh, she's getting up and starting all over in a new, I don't know, maybe retrospectively, I guess I just didn't look at it that way, but I would go do the things nobody wanted to do. I would do the risk taking. I would push myself. I would learn a whole new thing. I would learn a whole new group of people or how to deal with it. And I would go to these different places and experience some really interesting, pretty angry. And Burger King had a lot of really disparate, interesting, hard-charging franchisees who had very strong opinions. And my job was to go and do these different things. So by the time I had spent 4 years, moved 4 times for Burger King, I had done just about everything, including representing the single largest franchisee to the corporation who had more stores than the company. And they were very powerful. And I remember going back to Miami, where they were based, having the difficult conversation with the then CEO about what the franchisee told me to repeat to him about what he was and wasn't going to do. I was trying to sell salad bar, just happened to be the thing at the time. And I remember thinking, there's a lesson learned here. So all along it was learning the lessons about getting better, learning more, experiencing more. But, one thing we didn't talk about I didn't have mentors back then. We didn't have them. We didn't know what they were called. And certainly nobody was going to mentor a young woman. I will tell you, however, when people say, well, how'd you learn so much? My answer is I watched people make failures. I watched a lot. I watched it every company I was at, especially the senior executives. And at Burger King, these guys would surround themselves with people who told them exactly what they wanted to hear, which didn't make any sense to me at all. So it was tracking all those learnings early on. And when I got to the most senior position, couldn't get anywhere else, I'm like, I got to go do something else. So it was finding the right career space, making those choices. And somewhere along the way, to your point, it wasn't about money anymore. And every time I moved back then, they paid your closing costs. They paid, so I kept buying a house because that was the one thing I could do and afford, and people kept paying for it. So I kept moving and buying a house. So by the time I finally got to be vice president, maybe there was a year there where it was, eating noodles and whatever, but I started really putting my money into, at the time, real estate, because I knew that was the one thing that could.
So you're a real estate mogul.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't go that far, but I would say it was a good opportunity to grow. And when I really, by that time, I have decided I really want to be the CEO, not because of the money, not because of the title, but because I thought I could impact and influence culture, people, and make a difference. And I really believe that. And I set out to do just that, make a difference, impact and influence, and create a culture, which by then I had seen so many people fail at creating a powerful, supportive culture. And I was bound and determined to do that. And that really became important to me.
So culture, impact, and ultimately making a difference.
And being challenged.
And being challenged.
That was really, really, really important to me. And then it became about, how do I grow this business? How do I impact and influence? And so impact and influence, I think people think of it as employees. By the time I got to CEO, I'm impacting and influencing the board of directors, the equity holders, the shareholders, the debt holders, the employees, the franchisees, my sphere of influence,
the customers,
the 2 million customers a day, my sphere becomes, and I loved the accountability. I liked the pressure. I liked this knowing that I had to get up every morning and help make a difference. And I know that sounds like strange, but that really was the case. It was challenging myself, being the best I could be. That really was important to me.
You said you liked the pressure. Was that a learned skill? Were you always like that? Because a lot of people don't like pressure. And in fact, pressure and really the fear comes along of failing at something that's big enough to create that pressure. It keeps many people from even doing what it is that their heart tells them they want to do. I think
that's in my wood, because if you think about it, I grew up with 2 teachers who minimized pressure. However, they would talk a lot about the noble profession, making a difference, impacting and influencing, kids coming back and saying, I had you 10 years ago as a teacher. You changed my life. You made me care about U.S. history. You made me care about, my mother was physical education, teaching,
physical education.
She was teaching physical education.
Oh, physical. I was like, physical education. They need to teach that today. I was like, wow, I've never heard of this. We got away from that, but no.
Physical education. So it was all about taking care of one's body.
Sure.
Right. And she would just mingle in a little bit of mind, body, and soul. Just a teeny, because it was, public school system in California.
Yeah,
but it was all of that. And I took all that and made it into something that I think would make a difference.
And so you felt like you were having a positive, was it kind of the concept that too much is given, much is expected? Almost like you felt you were given a certain set of skills and you're like, I need to it's noble to use these skills, getting back to the teaching thing, whether it's in a traditional high school format or, to your father's point, you're teaching people every day, just in a different arena. You felt well,
I thought it was a gift and a privilege.
Yes.
It's a privilege to lead, and it's a gift to give feedback. And by the time I'm CEO, I remember, and it's not important who, but I was sitting in a room with someone. I was going through his performance appraisal and I was giving him feedback, and he said, well, you're picking on me. I said, picking on you? I'm trying to make you better. And you have to make a decision. If you don't want to be better, if you don't want to grow, long-term, you probably won't be successful with me or here, because this is all, I can't tell you the number of people who would come to the interview and say, I want to be part of your high-performing team. And I'm like, not so fast. Being part of a high-performing team, and you know this better than anybody, is not easy. You got to want it bad because you're being given constructive feedback every day from your supervisor, from your peers.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Yeah, football's not always super constructive. I always say, what's the difference between a coach and a critic?
Yeah.
I said, it picking on me. That's fun. I haven't heard that in a long time.
Yeah.
It's well, a coach criticizes you. Hey, like you're not hitting this hole the right way, or a coach in business, like you're not doing enough in this, or you need to stop doing that. But then they say, but here's how you fix it. And like, you could look at it like being criticized or picky on, but a coach is like, look, I need to tell you what you're doing wrong, which ultimately is I need to tell you you're not perfect, but here's how you can become better.
And by the way, when we fix that, when you solve that, I'll find something else.
Yes.
Because that's the reality of a
Yeah.
high-performing team, and that's the reality of business. And so it would, for me, if you said to me, where did I learn that? It just became a part of how do you grow and get better? And so early on, well, no, I guess it was Taco Bell. I'll never forget I had a supervisor say to me, Julia, your management style is exhausting. And I'm like, well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I was so proud of myself. And he said, no, that's not a compliment. I said, it is to me. You're telling me I care too much, I give too much. I think that's a compliment. And so I remember him looking at me saying, what? And I said, it's a compliment. It's a compliment that you think my actual management style is.
And I'd argue it's a compliment that you were willing to exhaust not only him but yourself to manage him. My coach once told me, like, he was on me, and I didn't have the right perspective, and I said, gosh, like, why don't you just tell me you don't like me? And he's like, no. He's like, don't worry when I'm coaching you hard, or I'm exhausting in my coaching.
Right.
He's like, you should worry when I stop, because that's when I've given up. And would you say that's a safe way? If you were willing to put in the time and energy to develop, it's because you saw something in him?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I would always say to people, when I care more than you do, I think, note to self, we may have a problem. When I start caring more about your performance than you do, and I keep bringing these things to your attention, and you've decided you don't want to work on them. And I would say to people, what do you think you need? Well, I'm doing a great job. So you're a high performer and everybody who works for you is mediocre. How's that work? I had that conversation as well with someone. So you ranked everybody who works for you average and you're superior. Do you understand the fundamental of how that doesn't really actually operate? And he said, well, everybody's doing their job, but I am superior. I'm like, okay, let's stop this conversation. You go home and think about it. Let's reschedule tomorrow. Let's think about how that, you might want to think about that differently, about how you manage people up, not down. And that became part of my sort of philosophy. And again, where did I learn that? I watched all those people manage down.
Speaking of watching people in your role as a boss on so many levels, and the ultimate boss, the CEO, there are certain people I'm sure you worked with who could take coaching. I don't know if anyone ever is like, hey, please tell me how I'm imperfect, and they always love it right away. But my experience is there's people who you say, hey, like, you're not doing a good job here, and this needs to improve. And again, not that everybody loves it, but they're like, okay. And they'll really tell me how to do better. Tell me, and they'll do their best. And then there's a lot of people like can't handle it, or just, accept it, but they don't apply it. Why do you think certain people develop the ability to be coached, but then certain people don't?
Wow. I don't know if I've ever been asked that question.
Yeah. We write a book on that, right?
That's a great question. And boy, I certainly saw well, ultimately I would say to people, I don't think it's a good fit, because you don't really want to make the effort. You really don't want to try to grow and learn. And I can give you all kinds of tools, but if you really don't want to grow and learn, you're probably what we refer to as you've hit the wall, because I really want a high-performing team and people who want to grow and learn and get better. And oh, by the way, help their peers do the same. And so if you really don't want to grow and get any better, you've probably, it isn't going to work long-term. Maybe short-term, it's fine, but long-term, it's going to be difficult. So I would have that conversation with people. Sometimes that would work as a little bit of jolt about, not so fast. Let me try that one again. Or sometimes it was like, it's just too hard. And I'm like, you know what? It doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean I'm a failure. It means it wasn't a good fit. And I would tell people that. And there are people I would say goodbye to, who still call me to this day, and we're good friends. And it was, you were right, Julia. It wasn't a good fit. It's ultimately not what I really wanted to do, or I didn't want to work that hard, or I didn't want to give that much. or it wasn't a good fit. And I'm thinking very much in particular right now about somebody who really wanted the title and the position, big job, but what came with it was a ton of
The
work
sacrifice.
and sacrifice
Yeah.
and having to learn new skills.
So they wanted all the upside and none of the downside.
Yeah. And I don't know, when you asked me earlier, where did that come from? I just think I never would ask you to do something I wouldn't ask of myself. And I would never, ever ask you to do something that I didn't believe in my heart of heart you could do, or you could learn to do, or had the inherent ability to do. Maybe it required you to pivot a little bit, which would be okay. And I would always tell people the same thing. You don't sell your soul for anybody, certainly not to work for this company. So if you think I'm asking you to sell your soul, you should not work here, because this is a great company working on its culture to be even better, right? But we are a high-performing team. We hold each other accountable. This is the way it's going to be. Those kinds of things had to be non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Those get set by the leader. But if you want to make it better, if you want, and I worked with a guy for like almost 15 years who worked for me, was my head of HR, and he once said to me, "You're moving too fast." And I remember being mortified that he said that. And I went home and I said, "Okay, I have to think about what you said." He was very specific about what I was doing. And he was absolutely right. I was moving too fast and I wasn't taking people with me. And I came back the next day, I apologized to the team. And then I went to write a letter to the franchise community saying, "I'm moving too fast." My whole team said, "Don't you dare do that. Don't show your vulnerability." I'm like, "Are you kidding? I want to take them with me. And if they're chitter chattering behind my back saying, 'This is ridiculous,' we got to fix it." Of all the things I ever did in my career, I got more response from that single email than anything I ever did, ever.
Interesting.
I must have gotten 300 emails saying, "I'll go with you anywhere because you have the guts to say you're moving too fast and admit that you made a mistake."
You think, and maybe not all the time, but you tell me, but certainly some vulnerability with your direct reports, or in this case, your franchisee, it actually in their eyes makes you a stronger leader. They're more likely to lead. Yeah.
Not only do I absolutely, but I mean, I have chapter and verse
No,
where I can,
you gave me the great example just now.
where you can, you use that and you say, that made all the difference. Or when I just, as a CEO, you have to make decisions every day, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. They need to be right more than they're wrong, or perhaps ultimately you're not the right. But I remember saying, when I made a mistake, I made a mistake. I made the decision based on what I knew at the time. And sometimes, for the most part, it was right. But there is also that, I call it the little voice in your head that says, everyone told me not to write the letter, and I wrote it anyway, and I made them send it out.
You followed your gut, so to speak.
And it was the right thing to do. And for years when I was CEO, I kept a file on my desk that was called "I Love Me," because sometimes you need to be reminded that you like yourself, because it gets, you're getting a lot of constructive feedback on a daily basis. And
yeah, you are. And especially as a CEO, because it's just the way people are wired. When they have a great experience, we're in the commercial real estate service business. You're in the customer service, in the restaurant space. When you provide a great level of service, or even just you provide, it's kind of an expectation. And when you don't, it's so, I don't know if it's 10-1, 5-1, or it's 1-1, but I just read the bad ones. It's like, I feel like people are more apt to reach out when they're dissatisfied than not. And so
20 times more likely.
Is it 20 times? Yeah.
20 times more likely.
Yeah.
And by the way, not only were they 20 times more likely, and then they'll tell 20 people.
That's right.
They're not stopping there. So people used to say to me, so some guy would spend $20 on a long distance phone call to tell you his burrito wasn't made correctly. I'm like, absolutely. And then he would spend an hour on the phone.
I've been meaning to talk to you about those burritos.
Yeah,
no.
But that is the way it went. And by the way,
go ahead.
No
please.
different in the app business.
Yeah.
Right?
If
there's a bug and a glitch,
let me tell you all the things that are wrong.
They're going to call me.
Yeah.
But I think that's what makes. But again, if you don't think it's a gift, you inherently are. And I just viewed it as I think you said to me earlier, what makes the difference? I don't know if it made the difference, but I viewed it as a gift. I viewed getting better and learning as a gift. I mean, otherwise, not growing.
I need a "I love me" file, right?
And I put those 300 letters, I kept that to this day. It's somewhere in a box in my garage. I can't get rid of it. And it was, I'll follow you anywhere because you admitted you made a mistake and you're going to slow down and you're going to take us with you. And that became
That's
my mantra.
That's powerful. Not to digress, we're not talking politics, but I'm always like, politicians like, why don't they just say, oh my gosh, I totally got that wrong. I've learned so much. Like, why doesn't a politician admit they're wrong more often? Like, I'm sure there's a reason. I
Do
think
you have another hour? We could
Yeah,
talk
no,
about
let's talk religion and politics. No, no, but I always think like, gosh, like I would be more inclined to vote for someone. They're like, hey, you voted for this bill 8 years ago, and it led to this legislation that, kind of unintended consequences. It wasn't the right thing. If someone's
Yeah.
just like, oh my gosh, I
Yeah.
got that so wrong,
Yeah.
and I thought it was right. Here's why. But yeah, I've learned so. I'd be like, I like that person. I'm more inclined, but they're gonna die on the hill.
Yeah.
It's my team versus your team. But I asked you a question about like, kind of, hey, what did you see in the people who really were coachable and could take that criticism? Because again, I found when I consider myself coachable. Anytime, Kyle, you don't. My first reaction is like, oh, and then I'd like to think because of how I raised in sports and whatever, I'm like, okay, all right, let's go. A lot of people can't. I've found, in the mentality podcast, I love to talk about the victim mentality. Because so much of what people want to hear is like, show me how to get the good mentalities that lead to all the success,
Sure.
like the ones you had. But I think half the time it's just not having the bad ones. And I think victim mentality is the worst. And I want to touch on a time in your life where if anyone had any reason to be a victim, it was you. You've been moving, you've been shaking, you're moving your way up the corporate ladder. You had mentioned to me earlier, so hopefully you're okay if I bring this up. You had kids,
Yeah.
and you were married, and you lost your husband.
Correct.
And if you just to put a pin on the timing, where was this in your career?
I was CEO of IHOP. Kids were very young, and I remember like taking a day to think through. Wasn't in the plan.
Not part of the plan.
Not part of the plan. And I think really for a while, all I really cared about was where they were very young,
And
5 and 7.
5 and 7. And when I say unexpected, some people may think that's, oh, well, he got sick and over. No, it was like a motorcycle accident.
A motorcycle accident. Yeah.
And
And I remember thinking, this is out of my wheel. So I went to a specialist who was a psychologist who specialized in tragedy. And he talked about, now kids can be a victim or whatever. And he said, we had long conversations about what that looked like, but I'll never forget. He said to me, I'm just going to talk to you alone. I thought, oh no, this is, and he said, as hard as this is for you, you have to still be the disciplinarian. You can't, you can't just, wipe this underneath you. They still need to, because discipline infers to children that you love them. And so they have to be loved and be supported, but you can't just, this has to be real, and you have to get on with life and get to the other side. And one day he called and said, I just want to talk to you alone. I'm like, oh no. And he said, your kids are going to be just fine. But you've done everything right, but they still need to know that they're loved and cared for, and everything goes on. And it's funny when I look back on that now, there was sort of a natural instinct of what you need to do, what has to be done. I didn't travel because I was traveling so much. I just stopped traveling for a little while and stayed close to home, and happy, healthy, wonderful kids today. But I think if they look back on that, they would tell you, but we had a normal, they would call it a normal life. We went on with the things that
as
became
normal it can be.
Absolutely.
That must have been so hard though.
It was not easy, but I look back on that now. And then along came their stepfather, who I told you about, nicest guy in the world, who wanted to be part of their lives and make that difference. But again, how do you keep it so that life goes on, and be respectful and do the right thing? And that was an interesting time. But I also think about how do you put it all in its natural perspective? No, I'm not a victim. But again, the plan changed. The plan got modified, and that's okay because that happens as well. So it went on to what am I going to do, and what am I going to do differently?
It's amazing because like I really want to be a mentally tough person and not victim mentality, and I certainly talk about it enough. But if I get like a flat tire on the way to work, I'm like, this is so unfair. I mean, why does this happen to me, right? And the in many ways, almost if not the worst thing in the world could happen to you. And it seems, and again, like
I just don't give up. I think
yeah,
part of it is, and I've taught the team because this is a startup. So it's different as a startup. Nobody gets that more than you. So it's different than going to a corporation that's already very successful, has infrastructure, people, systems, processes. This is a whole different thing when you're starting from scratch. And stuff would happen. And I remember saying, we just don't give up. We don't. I mean, yes, we're a startup. We don't necessarily get the respect that you would if you were a major corporation, but no matter. And we were struggling. It just happened to be something with a tech firm, think very large,
mhm.
right? Who wasn't responding to us. And so I couldn't get any help and I couldn't get any help. And finally I said, well, this is just unacceptable. And so I said to the team, we have to figure out another way because they're holding on to significant money and responsibility and tech work that we needed. And so I wrote a letter to the general counsel and I said, you don't know me from Adam. I sent it registered and certified, and I got a response within about 48 hours. And they were like, how's that work? I'm like, because I'm not going to give up. I'm not going the normal channels. And so I think that was the day that my small, mighty team at �𝑙𝑢𝑟𝑥 said, oh, yeah, we don't give up. We try a different way. We keep trying until we get success. And that became like a stronghold for we're the mighty team that just doesn't give up.
Yeah.
But it taught them, yeah, we tried the normal channels and it wasn't working. And I'm like, you don't know me, but I want you to hear my story and I want you to help us.
Hmm.
And the next thing I know, we got help.
Speaking of not giving up, and you said to this day, it could be challenging for women in the workplace. It's more subtle or more, I
Oh,
would
yeah.
say hidden, but it was more, it was less discreet back then. Hey, you're a woman, you're not going to get promoted,
Yeah.
which again, in today's,
You're the highest ranking woman we have, Julia. What else could you ask for?
what else could you ask for? Oh my gosh, it's like a bad TV show
It
or
was like a
something.
bad
Yeah.
movie. It's like
Yeah.
White Lotus on steroids.
Yeah, yeah.
So
You're
there's
like,
something.
you're
There's
like,
a there
you're like,
there.
no, that
Right?
didn't. There's these stereotypes and cliches of women in the workplace in the the
Yeah.
80s, 90s, and you're like, well, that didn't really happen, right? And you're like, no, like
No,
verbatim.
no,
You're a
no,
woman. Why would you want more? That I'm not laughing,
no, no. I know.
but yeah.
Yeah.
So you said not giving up. Uh, Even though you say it still happens today, is it safe to say today there's a lot more awareness? And I guess let me frame this in the opposite: is coming up, there wasn't necessarily this women empowerment movement that there probably is today when you were coming up. And so you really had to metaphorically like smash through that, not even that glass ceiling, that concrete rebar reinforced ceiling to become a female CEO, right?
I would say that's correct.
Yeah.
I would also tell you that oftentimes my peers who were all men, I never had a woman boss ever. And 99% of my peers were men. I remember many of them saying to me, well, you're the luckiest woman in the world. You don't have to go home to a family and a spouse. You can do whatever. You can take the risky job. And I always remember thinking, and I would always say the same thing. Do you want me to apologize for that? I'm sorry. I missed the point. You could do that. You made choices.
Yeah.
And
I was going to say that. Well, no, if they have kids, those are choices.
yeah, I mean, you
Yeah.
made a choice. I made a different choice. I'm the one going to Boston and deal with I mean, I don't know what you want me to do with that. I'm not going to apologize. I always thought that was sort of interesting. But I do think when I look back on all of that today, yes, it was much more prevalent. It isn't gone. But I think when you said people are much more aware, people looking for a job are much more aware just as much as anybody. And so what I coach and mentor today, whether it's a man or a woman, if someone can answer what's the vision of this company, what's the culture of this company, and how decisions are made, you're probably working for the wrong company. So people are much more likely to run away from a company that doesn't have a culture that develops people, that cares about people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether you have DE&I or not, that's not the point. The point is that you have a culture that develops and cares about all people. If you don't, you should run as fast as you can, because today anybody who wants a job probably has a job. So let's go somewhere where you have a culture that matters. And when I talk that way, people are like, well, I have to really think about that. And so I told you the story. I was recently speaking at a conference, and this very successful woman came up to me, very big company, huge, and said, I'm miserable and here's why. And I said, well, you decide. Do you want to stay or go? Because if you want to stay, I'll give you one piece of coaching. If you want to go, I'll give you another. And it wasn't a bad company. She was in the wrong department working for the wrong person. And we had this lengthy conversation about, what it's going to take. She's like, I do. And I'm like, absolutely. But those decisions are easy. I think starting out, it's more difficult. Like, I'm afraid to say anything because I don't want to leave that job. But I think people are much more willing to make, and COVID helped this too, to ask the difficult questions in the interview process,
Hmm.
right? And I coach even my young kids when they went to do their first job. These are the kinds of things you have to ask about. Ask about the culture. Do you really want to work for a culture where no one cares about your development? Probably not. Now, you have to bring forward your own development, but I mean, there's still a lot of companies today. It's subtle because it's more about just in general. Either you really do the hard charge and you're out of here. But let's talk about the culture, and who creates that culture starts at the top. A good board of directors for a public or private company holds first and foremost the CEO accountable for the culture, and then it goes from there. You either have it or not.
And culture is kind of wrapped into the
Sure.
bigger question here of getting back to your motivations. Was part of your motivation, like, I'm convinced motivation, there's layers. It's not any one. There might be one that's big, and
Sure.
on most days it'll get you up in the morning, but some days you're like, okay, well, that motivation for whatever reason today it isn't as big of a driver, but I have multiple. Was part of your motivation with all the success, all the moves, all the upward mobility, and ultimately becoming the boss, was it the female, like, I'm going to prove to you guys that I'm not only good enough, I'm going to be better, and then again within that a subset, I'm going to pave the way, a trailblazer for women behind me, and give them someone to aspire to
I
be?
sort of had done that throughout my career.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I got letters underneath my door when I was at Taco
Yeah.
Bell because I was the highest ranking female. And people said, good for you for getting a bathroom on the floor for women.
Did you put that in the I Love Me file?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Good for you for being pregnant
Yeah.
and all that goes with being pregnant, even back then. No, I don't think it was that. I think it was more, I think I can make a difference. I think I can make this a better company. I think I can show people that you can have heart and still make money.
Mm.
That EBITDA is not somehow disparate from having a culture where we care about people, we respect people, we want to grow people.
You'd argue you can make more money.
Well, and there you have it.
Yeah.
So I would say it was all about how to make a difference, but and adding things where I'll never forget that first month at IHOP, and I remember going to HR saying, "Okay, so where's our zero tolerance policy or what?" So we talk about this stuff today like it's always been around.
It wasn't.
No. And by the way, I talk about the restaurant business because I spent so many years there before I went to health tech, but name any company. It's not unique. We're
Mm-hmm.
not unique. And still to this day, I'll be challenged about sexual harassment, or I'll be challenged about, coulda, woulda, shoulda, or what went on back then. That was not unique. And because a lot of my friends are not from the restaurant business, and they'll tell you it wasn't necessarily unique. It was what's different today. And it's why myself and 9 other women started a women's food service forum, which was for the career advancement of women and minorities, which is still the largest organization, nonprofit of its kind in the United States, which really helps people provide career advancement, teach them the tools that they never got either at their existing company or whatever, about how we think about And one of the things they still to this day teach is got to ask that question when you're going for the interview about the culture. Because if it's a culture where the person sitting across from you can't answer the basic questions, probably don't want to work there.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds simple, but my own kids, I've had to coach about, what do you mean they couldn't answer the question, what's the vision of the company? What's the culture of the company? Can you list the values of the company? This isn't brain surgery.
Yeah.
So it's basic understanding of whether you're big, small, we have values and we're a very small company at 𝐴𝑙𝑢𝑟𝑥.
How would you share with the audience two ways? One, in a very traditional business sense, like maybe something you did as a CEO that you're really proud of, just from an execution of operating the business, putting it in a better place. But then a second way that, again, benefited the business, but perhaps was driven more by, you touched on EBITDA doesn't have to be just cold-blooded like finance, like maybe a decision that was driven more by compassion or feeling or emotion that proved out this concept of like, hey, this was driven by compassion and it still led to the company being even more profitable or better.
So from a business perspective, that one's kind of easy. It took a good 5 years to really do the full turnaround for IHOP. When I got there, it hadn't had comparable growth, really struggling. Cachet wasn't there, brand image wasn't there. So it took a good 5 years to simultaneously improve the marketing, improve the operations, improve the four-wall economics, et cetera. But we finally got there and it was incredibly successful. Now we're printing money. We were negative cash flow. Now I could go on for an hour. I won't. But it was a great time. And I remember renting out the Ritz in Maui to the entire team. Maybe 2,600 people went to really say
2,600
franchisees, their spouses, the team, to congratulate ourselves for becoming one in the country.
That's an
in
expensive
family
trip.
dining. Now they paid for a lot of it. We paid for some of it. Vendor partners paid for some of it. But it was quite the experience.
We have like 150 come to our sales trip at the Ritz or Four Seasons. I know what we pay for that. And I was like, man, 2,400.
But vendor partners helped. And I remember
I need to get some vendor partners. All right.
We celebrated in a large way. And we came back and I said, okay, now Houston, we have a bit of a problem. Remember that famous line?
Oh yeah.
Houston, we have a problem. And that is we were doing so well, we were going to be ripe for a takeover because we didn't really have debt. We had turned the company around.
It was cash flowing like crazy.
It was amazing. So I went to the board of directors and said, we probably need to look for an acquisition because if we don't find one, we're going to be ripe for takeover. But I promise you, I will be thorough and thoughtful, myself and the team, about looking for something that's going to be a wow. And that will be accretive and do all the right things and enough of the business.
And that was Applebee's.
So we went looking, and I remember saying to the street, I remember where and how. It was the beginning of January of 2027. Here's all the reasons that we need to do an acquisition. And I know a lot of you just want me to do a one-time dividend, but I think there's a better way. And here's what it is. And I remember the street saying, well, Julia, don't be ridiculous. You'll never find that. I'm like, well, let's give it a shot. So we began looking. And in those days, you read the Wall Street Journal. It came to your office and you read it. Okay.
Yeah.
Showing my age. So anyway, I'm reading the Wall Street Journal, sitting at my desk. And I don't know, there's something about that crisp smell of, I don't know. A cup of coffee. Anyway. So
the sound of the paper crinkling when you turn the page.
So see, you see, you understand.
I'm
anyway, I'm reading the paper, and there on the front page of the Wall Street Journal is this article that says Applebee's thinking about strategic alternatives up to and including, in the subhead, the sale of the company. And I'm like, that's interesting. I know that company better. And I started thinking about what it coulda, shoulda. And we were in family dining. Applebee's is in casual dining. So those are two different segments. But of course, at the end of the day, could it make sense? Could you put a shared service model together?
I feel like it'd be pretty complementary. Yeah.
Think so, but had to do the work. So I did some preliminary, called the called the banker and said, listen, I don't know if I'll even have an audience, but love to have the conversation. And I need to step back and tell you why. So when I took the job at IHOP, I had been the president of Applebee's. And when I got that job, the then chair and CEO said, when you and the team turn this company around, we'll make you CEO. I said, that's certainly, that's just perfect for me.
Mm-hmm.
So did I have any sacred cows? Because I'm a big believer and please don't give me any sacred cows. And they said none. So I went out and pretty much started with a new team, the best that I could possibly find. And to this day, most of them are good friends. But what we did was pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And so they hadn't had any comparable same store sales growth in years. There was a sort of a negative cachet. We weren't doing the growth. So simultaneously, somewhat of the same playbook, some things new, we put it together. That did not take 5. That took closer to 3. Couldn't be more proud of the team. So I went in one day to now the chair and CEO, the same person. The chair is retired. Now it's the chair and the CEO. I go in with my little graph, right? And I've got the chart going in the right direction. Stock has doubled. Life is good. Everything is going very well. I couldn't be more proud of the team. And I said, so I'm thinking it's about time to be CEO. And he's very reflective. He stops for a minute. I'm sure it was 10 seconds. It felt like a minute and a half. And he says, no. And I thought he meant no, not today. And I laughed and said, well, no, I'm not suggesting today, but perhaps for something you want me to showcase. Perhaps you want me to demonstrate something more than I have already, or the board wants to see something. And he said, no, not ever. And I remember thinking,
why?
I asked that question within just as quickly as you did. And he said, I don't have to have an answer. I don't have to have a reason.
Why do you think it was?
So we all have our own knowledge, but I think where I come from when I'm angry, the best thing to do is just stop for a minute. So I said, I'm going to excuse myself. I'm going to go home early and I'm going to reflect on this conversation, which is the only thing I could think of. And I came back the next day and I said, I've thought about it. And I think you're holding me accountable for everything, but you're not giving me the title. So I'm going to go ahead and leave. And he said, well, no, you can't leave. If you leave, the stock will tank. So if you think about that for a nanosecond, yeah. So I'm like, what did you just say? So anyway, we agreed that I would stay for a couple months and we would figure out a plan. So when I finally left, great story, actually. I was interviewing in different places across the country. And I actually was at a Marriott Courtyard in Southern California. The phone rang, my cell phone. 9/11 had just happened. The tragedy had just occurred. And literally 250 of us left our hotel rooms and went and sat in the lobby because we're not going anywhere. And we're all like in devastation. And the phone rings and it's the chairman of IHOP. And he says, are you safe? I'm like, I beg your pardon? He says, are you safe? I'm like, who is this? And he tells me it's the chairman of IHOP. We're calling all of our teammates just to make sure they're safe because many of them were on a plane. And I remember thinking to myself, if I'm lucky enough, this is where I'm going to work, because he called me part of the family and it meant more to me than you could possibly imagine. And he said, where are you? And I said, well, I'm in a Marriott Courtyard in Calabasas. And I'll never forget his response. Before I could even do anything, he said, there's only one company in that Calabasas and you don't want to go to work there. You want to work for us. And I said, well, sir, I actually haven't been offered a job yet. And he said, you will be. And the rest, as they say, is history. So when I went to IHOP, I had in my head that we were going to turn this business around. I didn't realize we were so successful, probably exceeded our wildest expectations. We needed to do the acquisition. I didn't know whether, and I don't believe in falling in love when you do M&A. I just don't, I learned early on, don't fall in love. It's a mistake. So I didn't. And I went to the board and said, look, we're going to look at a whole bunch of things. And we did. I don't think I've ever talked about where we looked, but we looked in fast food. We didn't look in family dining because you can't really have a direct, you can't really, it doesn't work that way. But casual dining, a lot of fast food, a lot of fast casual. We looked at a lot of different things. And as I started getting into it, I realized the Applebees could be really interesting. So as the story goes, we went looking and I went to the board and said, look, we're going to start doing due diligence. This is going to cost money. You have to agree to this because I don't want to go down this path. They said, sure. And I remember assigning someone to each of the major pieces of the business. So someone took legal, someone took finance, someone took supply chain, anything where we needed to look at due diligence. And we were probably 4 months in, we were sitting around a meeting. And I even remember the guy's name who stood up and said, I'm so-and-so and I represent supply chain. And did you know the little known fact? And I'm like, this ought to be good. And he said, 75% of all the products we buy at IHOP are from the same manufacturer as Applebee's uses. And I did not know that. And I'm like, ding, 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 ding.
Yes.
To your point earlier, I'll start a supply chain. I'll start a co-op. We'll have it combined. Think about the savings. So the single best thing I ever did was create the co-op, which took a while to do, but ultimately put um, the accountability and the income on the balance sheet for the franchisees, which probably to this day has probably been worth $500 million in the middle of the P&L. It's probably
That's not nothing.
so I would say day one when we first went live, probably 300 basis points. I mean, it was a lot of
No,
money.
that
It
was
was
an
huge.
amazing answer. It's
So
very,
it was. I'm
yeah.
more proud of that. Now, obviously, ultimately, you don't borrow $2.3 billion for revenge. You just don't do that. No,
so
you
they,
don't.
that's
but
a
we did
very
borrow
nice
$2.3
thing to
billion.
say, but
We did buy Applebee's.
I'm going to frame it in a very simple way. You did within, 6, 7 years acquire the company of the guy who said you're never going to be the CEO.
That is correct. But you don't do that because of, but when I called him to say
you should run for office. You are a great politician.
So after we had announced it to
I know you're a human being and there had to be just the smallest degree.
Hold on.
Okay.
So after we went to the street and told the street that we had made the acquisition, and I'd never sat in a room where the guy goes, okay, wire transferring $2.3 billion. I mean, it's kind of a strange, anyway. So we had just told the street, we had lots of questions from the buy side and the sell side and so forth. And then when we left, I said to the CFO, I need to go make a phone call. And he said, okay. So we were in the attorney's offices. I left one office. I went to a private office and I picked up the phone and I called the chair and CEO of Applebee's. And I said,
and you said, how you like them apples?
Nope. I said,
I always wanted to do
just
that.
wanted to say hi. And he said, I was expecting this call. And I said, as you know, this morning we announced that we have purchased for $2.3 billion the company and we don't need two of us. So I'm going to have to let you go.
You're a stone cold killer.
So
this is the 60th episode. Zach, what episode is this? That is the most insane, hardcore, beep this out, mother thing that I've ever heard. Like, and you do it so well.
But it was sort of short lived. But the best part of that story is, so I walked out of the office.
Jesus.
The meeting is done. And the CFO and I are going to go, I don't know where we were going, but we get on Fifth Avenue. I remember this like it was yesterday. I think the world of him. We get on Fifth Avenue and he throws up on the side of the Fifth Avenue. And I'm like, buck up. Buck up. This is big doings. We are going to make this work. And he's like, Julia, we just borrowed. He's like, this is a lot. I'm like, we're going to be highly successful. Stop worrying about it.
He legitimately like puked on the street?
A little bit, yeah. And then we went to lunch at that famous restaurant in New York City where it overlooks the skating rink at Rockefeller Center. And then he was fine. And we had like a moment. And he said, Julia, you're right. We got this. I said, we got this. We got this.
Yeah.
And then started the thing I'm most proud of is making the deal and obviously all that went with it. And obviously
it was a great deal.
It was a great deal. But the thing that was toughest, and you asked that, was bringing the two cultures together because the Applebee's culture was very different than the IHOP culture. And what I said is we're not going to have either. We're going to have one culture. And then because the franchisees at Applebee's didn't like being owned by IHOP, I changed the name to Dine.
The Dine.
Because it was, what it did, it created the opportunity to, we're all going to formulate around Dine. And that's going to be the new. So we took the best of Applebee's because they had some really great values and sort of infrastructure. And we took the best of IHOP and we combined it into one culture that became bigger and better.
Yeah.
But clearly the supply chain idea was a good idea. I mean, if you really think about it, IHOP was the largest buyer of bacon in food service in the US, and Applebee's was the largest buyer of ribs in the US. So if you go to the if you go to the pork manufacturer and you say, here's our contract, I want the best deal, suddenly I have the best deal. Yeah.
It's such it's a right down the middle of the fairway. M&A reason, like it's efficiencies, economies of scale, a greater leverage with your, suppliers, your vendors, your contractors. But yeah, that's such a cool story.
But it makes for, I know people. I gave the graduation speech at USC for the business department, and I got a standing O.
Oh.
And people were like, and I'm like,
I would have given you one. They didn't let me into the school.
But they didn't. It wasn't for revenge. It really was the right business decision. And the part that never gets written is the board had given me a range. and I went to the lowest possible part of the range. Applebee's board accepted it. It was the right thing to
That's
do.
awesome.
And as I've always said, I give credit where credit is due. It goes to the franchisees. It goes to the team that I had in play. It goes to the franchisees willing to put aside whatever to do what was right. And at first they were like, well, why would you start a purchasing co-op? You don't benefit. I'm like, sure I do. You make more money and you're more likely to invest and build more restaurants. Everybody
Yeah.
wins. But I had to repeat that several times.
Yeah.
Those are the sort of and then I would say the thing I'm most proud of would be starting this health tech company that's making a real difference in people. There's no such thing like it in America today. And I don't think anywhere in the world. So ultimately it will be the 8 dimensions of wellness. You get daily coaching, prompt engineering on your iPhone, your Android, or your computer. It talks to you, you talk to it. And it's what they call prompt engineering, but it's also closed. So I have doctors, experts, clinicians, institutions telling it where it can go search for data. And only that published scientific data is used in giving you daily.
Yeah, and I think the hardest thing for again, health and wellness is the self-motivating, but really the self-discipline. And if an app or a technology, and people pay a lot of money to have a human do it, it's called a personal trainer, but where it's like, just tell me what to do and hold me accountable. I'll lift the weight, I'll do the running, but like I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
And
so
it
this
sounds like
notion of the daily is working,
cool.
and obviously it's golden, and it's turned out to be something that we can not only have fun with, but grow, and it prospers. I didn't know how to do meditation. I didn't know how to do box breathing. I do all of those things today. I mean, certainly I care about my physical well-being, but what I've been learning from my own app is sort of amazing.
Sure.
And so we're taking generative AI it's powered by generative AI, but it's really taking it to a whole level of, it's just not push a button and it talks to anything in the universe. It only talks to those places, whether it's Stanford Longevity Institute, Mayo Clinic, NYU. It goes only to places where the data is been vetted by this group of doctors and experts that I am using. And I'm attracting a finer and finer group of people. So what started happening is insurance companies, and then people started calling me saying, well, wait a minute, this is kind of interesting. I could be using this to all of our employees. I could be using it to different folks. I had a surgeon call me the other day, and I'm thinking, I don't know how this is going to. He says, no. I work on children, and they're largely obese. If I had an app that would give them daily routines to change their habits, I'm in. So suddenly it started taking on a bigger, better life. And now I feel like I'm finally able to make the impact I could never really. People just don't want to go to a place, a restaurant that teaches you how to. It's incongruous.
I get it.
So this provides that unique opportunity.
𝐴𝑙𝑢𝑟𝑥.
𝐴𝑙𝑢𝑟𝑥.
Yeah, ALLUR.
𝐴LURX. And the generative AI, the code name is Allura, and she talks to you.
Oh, that's cool. Do I get to pick the voice?
You can eventually.
Sweet.
So it might be your voice. I mean, we actually.
You don't want my voice.
Oh, I actually think you actually could do a very good job of that. I mean, it could be, we would duplicate it in Gen AI, and then it would be your voice. You have a very you can be hard, but you can be soothing, and we kind of like that for the male voice. And
dude, I'm a voiceover. I got a new career here.
Could be. I don't want to go on a limb and say it's a done deal. I want to say it's a work in progress.
First is 𝐴𝑙𝑢𝑟𝑥 app. Next is Disney movies. Tom Hanks, watch out. Last question for you. My parents, I'm one of 5 and I'm 42, but my parents say, you never stop being a parent. We talk about, the kids that are out of the house, like they never stop being a parent. I think one of the coolest things about sitting down with you and hearing your story and getting to ask questions isn't just the insane career accomplishments or the most gangster business move I've ever heard. By the way, they're going to make a movie. They made the Devil Wears Prada. Then they make, it's like Wall Street. They make movies about these big business people and business moves. They need barbarians at the gate. They need barbarians are in casual dining. The fact like, hey, we bought your company and we don't need 2 of you. You're fired. Like, that's so cool. But I think I got 4 little kids. And so this is from a dad's perspective. I think being a working mom hits even harder,
Yeah.
respectfully, than a working dad. And a working dad, I'm constantly every day doing my best to just give it everything I have at the company for both individual personal reasons and my teammates and
Right.
giving them the best of me, but then fulfilling not just my commitments as a parent, as a father for me, a mother for you, but just I love my children, so I want to just be there. What advice would you have for working parents, working dads, but especially working moms, as someone who, I mean, you did it all with work, and there's a lot of sacrifice that happens at home, but yet you know you're a mom too.
Yeah.
Like it's
Now I've been
such
asked this question a lot.
okay, good.
And I would tell you, at the time, I didn't do this intentionally, but I had my kids in my 40s. So that automatically makes me somewhat unique. Everybody's fine, everything is well. But when you have kids in your 40s and you're successful, you can have financial support to help you. And make no mistake about it, that was certainly part of it.
And
But in
the infrastructure.
the infrastructure, but in both cases, I picked a partner who was willing to do just like I was, whatever it took. So I have often told people who ask me that question, better find the right partner.
Oh.
Better find somebody who's willing to go the distance, because having kids means you usually need help. Now, it may not be in the traditional sense, it may be in the untraditional sense. I've got friends who are a dad that raised their kids. I've got it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you need that help in one way, shape, or another. And it comes in lots of varieties, lots of traditional and untraditional. In my case, for a while, untraditional, more traditional. But if you ask my kids, the greatest lesson I learned, there were 2 of them. One day early on, I went into the house and I was still on the phone. And my daughter said, "There's mom talking on the phone." And I overheard that. And that was the last time I ever walked into the house on the phone. Because when I walked in that house, that was their sanctuary. Maybe after they went to bed, I might have to make phone calls. But I learned a very valuable lesson. There's mom talking on the phone. So we come in second. It was implied. And that broke my heart, that I didn't mean to. I didn't do it with forethought,
Mm-hmm.
but people knew I can still get Julia. And my thing became, I wrote an email that night saying, going forward, unless it's something, unless it's a dire emergency, please don't call. And believe it or not, there are unfortunately emergencies that happen, right? Not often, but they do happen in any
Sure.
business. So I tried to limit that, and that became my mantra. Might talk to you about a business issue after the kids went to bed. So that became number 1. Number 2, I guarded that time with my life. I would do just about anything. Now, I gave up a lot. So when you're raising kids and you're a working parent, as you are, you do give up a lot of things, but I didn't care. It didn't matter to me. It wasn't important. So dinners out with friends, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So there is that part of my life. You called it a season of your life.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. It's a season of my life. And the way I remember it is this past holiday, my stepdaughter gave us this. It's a small screen. It's on the kitchen counter. And she loaded up, I don't know, 500-600 pictures.
And
And they rotate.
Yeah.
And we don't ever turn it off. I'm like, oh my God, I remember that. Oh my God. And it's all of that season
cool.
of raising those kids. And I remember it was like, and there isn't anything in the 500-600 pictures except us and the kids. That's all it is. It's the kids at school, the kids in sports. My son played football, not at USC. He's like, Mom, I didn't go to a Division I high school. Let's not be silly. So
he's smarter than me. Took less hits to the head.
But all of it. And by the way, we're not done. We found out we probably have another 1,000 pictures. So we're going to load all that
That's
up.
cool.
Because if you think about when I started having kids, we didn't have digital.
No.
So now I'm transforming all those pictures sitting in the box, I'm transforming all that. But what am I most proud of was all those memories.
Mm-hmm.
And not one of it is me at work. Not one of it is him at work. Not one of it is.
No pictures of your guy throwing up on Fifth Avenue.
Yeah, I don't think he appreciates me bringing that up. But I would tell you, it's what our memories are that we
That's
created as
awesome.
a family. And at the time, I thought, oh my God, that thing's, it's going to be on all the time. And now it's become like sometimes I'll find myself just sitting there. Oh my God, now where are we? Well, we're, whatever. And what it taught me, and as I reflect on it, that it was turn off the phone, but it was also be there, be there. And when the kids were really young, and I know this sounds corny, and we didn't call them podcasts back then, but I actually was on a radio show, and this woman was like, well, I don't know what to think of you. I mean, you're a CEO, so you're never home with your kids. And I'm like, she said, well, how do you make it work? And I would tape record my voice and I would read books to them. And then the nanny would put them on at night or
That's
whatever.
very cool.
So they would hear me reading to them. They barely remember it, right? But I think I can. I think, and it would be my voice. And you do whatever you need to do to be successful. But I look back on that and someone said, did you get defensive or angry, or were you like, did people make fun of you? And I said, sometimes, but I made it work for me and my family. So I can't speak, people always want to say, how did you do that? And I'm like, well, it worked for me. But the advice is better find an infrastructure that works for you. And then there are those who don't have a voice or didn't have a choice, and they have a different set of circumstances. So when I talk about giving back, that's me find a way to help those folks who don't have a choice like you and I. And so life has, right, been different for them. And so there's where I'm spending my time in my years where I can donate both my time and my hard-earned money to how do I help people who are less fortunate and don't have those choices. So what a great way to
No, it's awesome.
finish the question.
Like, yeah, it's such a big question, and it's the right spouse. But I agree. Sometimes people will ask me that question, and again, I'm not a working mom, which again, I think it hits harder. But I just said I think God gives us enough time to be really great at work and really great at home, but He doesn't give us enough time to be great at work, great at home, have a great social life, and a great golf game. And so you got to start cutting some of those out. Which ones do you want to cut out? I think for me, the choice is very easy, very simple, right? I don't need to be at the bar, and I don't need to play
very
golf.
Openly about, I have some really dear women friends, and I talk very honestly about I'm going to start using the season, those years where I wasn't there very much. I would stay in touch, but I wasn't there because I was busy. And all of those women, many of whom didn't have children, understood and respected me for making choices. You make choices, and I made choices. So,
well, you made a lot of good choices, both personally and professionally. And another great choice in coming here and sitting down with us. I can't thank you enough. This has been awesome. Julia, last thing is there any resources, any place you would direct listeners who are looking to achieve the success you've had in your life personally and professionally? Any books, any classes, anything that has been a big impact for you that we could direct the audience towards?
So I would absolutely go to our app that's on the Apple Store, 𝐴𝑙𝑢𝑟𝑥wellness.com, because it really does help you with sort of what I'll call finding that everyday center, if you will. But I would say nowadays, there are so many people that you can rely upon to either be your mentor or your coach or a class that you can take. But also, if you're working in a company, big or small, watch the mistakes people make and learn from them, because you can decide to be whatever you want to be. You make those decisions.
Okay. Thank you so much. This has been great. It's crazy. And again, I don't think I'll ever forget that story you told me, but so many cool things. We didn't spend enough time talking about, but make sure to go to IHOP and Applebee's on Veterans Day, in addition to many things.
Yeah,
right?
that's it's still the number one day for Applebee's, because again, it's your chance to say thank you. And as you know, there's some great stories there about what it means to veterans or active military to have somebody in a restaurant either salute them or just go by and say thank you for your service.
Well, thank you for thinking of the veterans as amazing, amongst many amazing business idea and execution on your behalf. And thank you for coming here. This has been great.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate it.
It was wonderful. Great questions.
Thank you.